How you doing? I'm Ben, and I like to draw, paint, and sculpt, particularly in this stylized way. We're going to use the simple shape as a testing ground before we jump into the more complex painting of the character. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the 4 steps that I take to paint believable light on my characters. This helps us invent light, manipulate it, and still make it look believable. I've got this line work already here. What we really want to do is start with what is the light source. Without light, we see nothing. So we really want to understand that light source first. Next up, the object, okay? What object are we drawing? And not just what is the object, but more so the topology of the object. What is the surface? Because that's going to help us understand where to put shadows, where to put light. Next up is going to be the local value and local color. So that's going to tell us, basically, if you were to explain it to someone, what color is this thing, right? Is it an orange, a green, a blue, a pink? Whatever it is, that's what I'm thinking about when it comes to sort of your local color and local values. And then we want to figure out how shiny or matte the object is. Now, this isn't linear. I'm not just going through and saying, okay, light source, topology, local value, shininess, and just going bing, 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 and then it's done. Happy days, right? Now, I'm going back and forth between these and sometimes jumping from one to another and back and double checking the light source, okay? So I don't want you to think that this is just like a formula. It's more of a loop that I'm going to go through for each sort of material. So what I like to do sometimes is start off with a simple shape first, so I can then reference that on my more complex shapes. So for this character, I want to have the focal point be her face, and I'd really like to play around with the warms and the cools, so warm lights and cool shadows. I'm thinking that she is going to be in some sort of blue, okay? So I want it to sort of be like a diffuse lighting setup in the shadows. I want to do some like complementary colors that we're going to play with. Then I'm going to imagine some sort of harsh sunlight, some sort of sunlight or some sort of light coming through, casting shadows and really focusing the audience's eye onto her face. So that's going to really be our focal point here. So what I've got here is just a shape that I've created with the lasso tool. You can really just create any shape. The only reason I've done this is to work within it using a clipping mask. Just makes it really easy so I don't go outside of the edges. It's a time-saving thing. Let's just grab our skin tones, and you can skip the whole, like, if you know that it's going to be a really, really blue light, you can skip the local color and you can just start going with the blue as well. All right, so we've got our head here. I'm going to imagine that the helmet isn't here just for the moment. So it's typically not going to be this light, really diffuse light. There's going to be very smooth gradients. All right, there's not going to be harsh shadows. It's going to be very subtle. Subtlety is the name of the game here in the shadows. We also don't want the shadows to compete with the lights. If we put a whole bunch of details and a whole bunch of contrast in the shadows, the lights aren't going to be as punchy. And if you like this kind of stylized stuff, I do have an 8-hour 10 chat to walk through available on Proko right now. So proko.com/Ben Eblen. I go through how to draw one of my characters from start to finish, including the line work, which we didn't get into here. We're starting from the shadows and moving up, right? So we're almost turning on the lights. So we start with no lights, turn on the shadow light. And we're going to turn on that key light or that main light that's really going to hopefully make this pop. Right, maybe the cheeks here. So I'm adding just these high points, these points where that light is going to be reflecting the most, and then we can start to do the opposite as well. Again, subtlety is key here with this diffuse light. It is very, very, very subtle. Again, there's no rules to any of this stuff. We can do the shadows first, we can do the lights first, as long as we've got this idea of what we're trying to do. Again, the tool doesn't really matter, the process doesn't really matter. I like to think that, okay, is there logic to what I'm doing? If so, I'm heading in the right track. Now, I'm going to start thinking about the helmet here, because the helmet is going to be occluding a lot of the head. All right, there is going to be less light that's going to be coming in on the top here. So we just want to take that into account. Even underneath the chin. All right, so this is a good starting point. All right, we're starting to get a little bit of form. Okay, again, thinking about the topology, what's facing towards the light more so, what's facing away. We can really start to round things out. And I'm just using a soft brush. There's no crazy brush. Let's start adding our light. We're going to go back through, think about where is that light source. It's going to be coming from the top here. Coming down, it's going to be casting that shadow on top of that head, again thinking about the topology. Then we can think about the skin tones, right, and how that light is going to be a more white light, maybe on the orange side, but that's going to show more of that local color of the skin. Again, we've got a clipping mask here. Let's just block in where that light is going to be. Now, instead of doing the whole head below here in light, I kind of want to cut it off a little bit. Like I mentioned earlier, I almost want a little bit of, like, something's happening. A gate's opened, or something is just a little bit of visual interest instead of having the whole thing lit here. So this is where layers do help a lot. So we can play around with where the light is shining. Now this is where the topology and the planes of the head are going to come in super handy. Here, up, tucked in, wrap around, come down. All right, so all these little undulations, all the ins and outs of the face, even across this way with the nose. This helps me indicate where that light is actually going to be hitting, and it helps me invent. Again, we've come up with a lighting scenario. Now, because this is a more harsh light or a hard light, we're going to get harsher and harder shadows. Okay, so they're not going to be as soft as our diffused shadow light. All right, we're going to get some cast shadows from the lashes here. So all I'm doing now is I'm just erasing the skin tones here. I'm erasing that light. I'm turning the light on in some parts, and I'm sort of scrubbing the light away, essentially, to reveal that shadow underneath. And we've already got like a built-in shadow color, right? And that was the purpose of doing the shadow underneath. It gives us like a nice rich blue that we can continue to push if we want. So I could come through and start to add some of this skin variation, a bit of the color variation, to really help sell that light source. Notice there's a little bit off color, right? Doesn't matter. We don't have to follow this verbatim. We can take a little bit of it as a suggestion more so. But I do like to have a little bit of this color variation in the skin. Reduce that saturation. Maybe put a bit of an indication of some of the highlights on that egg of the head, right? Now mightn't be a bad idea, before going too deep into the skin tones, to get everything around it feeling somewhat lit by the same light source. We can use the same logic based on this egg, based on what we've got here, and we can push and pull it and nudge it and move it however we want if it's not looking right. So what we can do is, for this inner part of the helmet, I'm just going to use a dark blue. And to really make this sort of pop a little bit more, I might do a little bit of Command U and just darken it down a little bit more. We can play with that a little bit later. We're just going to sort of block in the rest of the shapes here. All right, again, the local color might be more neutral, might be more gray, but we can go through the same process. And let's add in that blue light to begin with a big soft airbrush. A lot of the colors of our objects. Now, there's no shadow that's going to be casting on top of this helmet. We're going to be seeing a lot more of that local color. Okay, and then we do have that shadow that's coming across here. Now that's just something in the background, far away, is going to be occluding some of that direct light. Now with some of these sections in here, I imagine them being a little bit darker. So what we can do, again, this is just a tool. You could paint this in normally. I like to use the multiply layer just for speed. So you can come in here. Because we're working on a white background, sometimes it can start to become hard to judge our values. What I'm also going to do is play off of that blue shadows and add quite an intense red background, because I think that would look cool to almost see some of it come through in the final piece. We can add in some indication of kind of that darker background just to frame the head more so So now we're going to be working a little bit more with the head. We're going to add some color variation and just refine our thinking around the light source, the topology, the local color and values and some of those color variations. Now to add, this is a nice little tip. The multiply layer is typically used to darken things. What I like to use it for as well is sort of like a multi-tool. If I bring the color picker up to the brightest brights and I just sort of twig it towards the color that I would like, it can be a very, very useful sort of tinting tool as well. So it doesn't change the value so much, right? So if I did this and I brought it down here, it's going to darken a whole bunch of stuff and it's going to sort of throw off all the values. But if I bring it all the way up to the top, it almost just acts like the color layer mode, right? So it really becomes way, way, way more versatile. So I'm thinking about some of the areas in the face that might be a little bit more red, have a little bit more blood flow. She might be a little bit more tired. So I might even whack in a little bit more purples underneath the eye. And we can refine. So our rendering isn't done here. Our form, shading and painting. Right, so just adding a little bit of that color variation. Maybe whacking in a tiny bit of this yellow. Right, you guys have probably seen the sort of color zones of the face. So you notice that I'm doing a lot of these color variations in the light. I'm not going to do it too much in the shadows because again, I want to play with contrast. I want to really keep the focus in the light on her face. If I start doing too much color variation in the shadows, I'm going to do a bit, but if I start getting really finicky with all the different little subtle color variations, at least in this piece, I think it could detract a little bit from the light source. That's my hunch. All right, so let's start to look at the shininess factor. A good little tool for this is the normal layer mode. If you do just want to paint straight on, nothing wrong with that. The screen layer mode can be pretty helpful as well. If we're just going to very subtly start layering on a little bit of these values. I really want to make sure that we're thinking again about the topology. Typically the nose and under the eyes and the forehead are going to be more or less the shinier parts of the face, depending. All right, it's going to be different for different people because there's just a little bit more oil content in the skin. We've also got an opportunity here to feather in an indication of this plane change of the forehead. All right, just that little bumping here. All right, why does that look 3D now? All it is this principle here, thinking about this bump there, thinking about the planes, always thinking about the planes, the topology, and again, jumping back and forth. Where is that light source? Where is the planes? It's how everything looks 3D basically. We do want to add that local value of the hair. I'm thinking the hair is maybe like more of a gray potentially. Gray hair, blonde hair could be kind of fun. All right, and maybe turn this to an overlay. Right, overlay allows those darker values to sort of show through. Okay, so we're going to just continue on building this because it's a focal point. We're going to focus on the face. The thing I like to do when there's a difference between like shadow and light is to bump up the saturation just a little bit, but just between that light and shadow. So it has a little bit to do something called light fall off. There's also this thing called subsurface scattering, which is where the light scatters underneath materials. Typically, you see it a lot in skin, and I've just gone here and used the color layer mode because that definitely doesn't change the values. So I don't really want to mess around with the values too much around this area. And even here on the hair, this is like a ledge almost. Okay, so we still want to treat this ledge like it's being affected by the light source. Right, so there's a plane on here and there's a plane sort of on the edge of this hair. It's something that we can use to make it feel more 3D as well. We can bump up the shininess here as well on the hair if we want. Make sure that this is still reading. Alright, so we're going to get a little bit nitty gritty. We're going to refine some of these sketches. We're going to play around with the eyes. So let's get these eyebrows looking a little bit more eyebrowy. Alright, so with the eyebrows, I like to sort of sharp shapes, but again, not just with the light, but even with the forms themselves from a drawing perspective. I want to make sure and I'm following that idea of the topology. Right? Everything's wrapping around as it should. Now this is where we're going to make these eyes kind of pop. They're going to feel a little bit more realistic because of the context we've built around them. We want to look at that light source and understand how it's going to affect the eyes, because the eyes essentially are just like a bowl. All right, imagine a bowl. So maybe a little bit of red in there. So give that base local value to begin with. Then we use that logic. This is going to be darker up here, particularly because it's in cast shadow as well from the lids. Alright, so it's starting to get a little bit of that roundness, and we can do the same under the eyes here. We're really starting to push some of these shadows. You notice that I'm painting over some of the line work as well. I might like to keep some of the line work and do a little bit of painterly plus line work, sketchiness. Now I like to add almost like a ledge here for the lower lid, right? And that ledge is going to be more on the shinier side, right? So again, we're thinking about, okay, what's shiny? Well, this eye might have a little bit of shine. Technically speaking, I don't think that there would be highlights on the eyes, but this is the point in time where you can be like, oh bugger, I'm gonna put the highlights there because it looks cool, you know? But if we just like put a little bit of that highlight there, where we think it may look quite nice, and then we can tell that same story with that highlight on this inner edge of the ear. All right, so we're telling the same story. Now it's up to us just to keep it consistent as best we can. So instead of having everything like airbrushy, I'm going to decide this shadow shape here. This is going to be that shape of the shadow shape, and then this is going to come into this shape of the sort of inner eye part. I'm just going to design that shape there. I'm not just going to blur it all out, okay? Because as soon as you start to blur it all out, at least in my experience, it starts to look very digitally, right? Everything's blurred because it's fun to blur stuff because it's like, oh, it's all nice and blended. But then when you zoom out, it gives that little bit more of that like sort of artificial kind of look. So playing around with edges here and designing our shapes is really useful. An artist to look at for that kind of stuff, JC Leyendecker, one of my favorites. To get to a point where I can do this, a lot of the training that I went through myself was understanding what light actually does. It's less about techniques and tips and tricks. It's really at a foundational level, understanding what different light sources do, you know, how different materials react to those different light sources, and really understanding values more so than anything. We do want to work a little bit in here with the shadows. All right, we still want to think about the planes. So I've noticed here that top lip is a plane that's facing down. Same with under the chin here. That's going to be a little bit darker. All right, we don't want to completely neglect our shadows. And we can be very subtle with some of these value changes. That's going to do a lot for us. Another thing with light, another little tip, is oftentimes the edges between form shadows and or cast shadows are going to give you a good indication of what the texture of something is. So for example, this hair, we can sort of really showing some of the strands overlapping that hard cast shadow. It just gives an indication of the texture of the hair, right? It's not perfectly flat. It's not like a super plastic smooth surface. And it's oftentimes at that intersection of either the cast shadow, right? Because some of these hair strands might be just poking just slightly past that shadow. Just gives it just a little bit of natural look to it. It's just not perfect. Now I'll mention here as well. So even these little panels on the helmet, they're going to be affected by light differently. So what I like to do is I like to think about the edge that is facing the light. Right, so this is going to give it that illusion of sort of being a separate piece of material. All right, even here, Not very subtle, but it sort of starts to read more as like a separate piece of the helmet. Now I want to start to introduce, remember in the beginning I talked about this red in the background. Introducing just a little bit of that in places. Almost like I've like accidentally missed a few places in the painting itself, just to bring a little bit of that background in to the main piece. And it kind of sets it off nicely with that blue. We could have even tested it as well with the egg. We can cross into some of the spots here if we want, but it can kind of help pull it together a little bit more, you know. And even, I don't know, I just like doing it. One guy that I see that does this a lot is John Asaro. But what we can also do, we can be like pretty abstract with it as well. But when things are being reflected, particularly on a circular or a convex shape, they're going to warp and they're going to distort. So we don't want to throw like just a completely flat image on there. We kind of want to wrap it around a little bit. So there could even be some indication of like little buttons, bits and pieces. Maybe she's in the cockpit of a ship or something. You know, we could even utilize some of this red in here to give a hint of some of these something. You know, I'm not even really too concerned with what it is I'm reflecting, as long as it's making sense theoretically, right? Like at least a little bit of sense, you know. So maybe there's a lot of little buttons here, maybe there's a little bit more of like warmer. Typically, as it gets closer to the center of the object, right, all these reflections, it gets less intense. I believe this is the Fresnel effect, but it's almost like how you can, if you look down, straight down into a lake and it's like shallow, you can see the bottom, but as you start looking up into the horizon, it becomes more of a mirror reflection. Think of it like this: we're looking directly into the lake of her helmet, directly at her. You're going to see more of what's happening through the helmet, and as that curves around, that's making more of an angle, which is going to reflect more of the environment. Another little rule of thumb there which can help. So I can add a whole bunch of stuff that would be reflecting. Maybe there's a bunch of screens that she's got that are very important, and she's testing it all out. So maybe there's a bunch of LED screens, some of the heads-up display, whatever. What we can do to make it look a lot more naturalistic is to give that Fresnel effect and really erase that middle section to allow the most reflective parts to be on the side and not so much in the middle. And this is one of the ways that I like to go about inventing light on my characters. Starting with these 4 key ideas of light, the object, what is the object, the local value of the object, and how shiny or matte it is. Giving ourselves a test, essentially, a little sandbox to try things out on, and that was our egg. And then trying to translate that as a starting point onto our more complex character. And with these 4 steps, it's not a step 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's almost like the 4 elements that allow me to check my work as I go. And after about 4 hours refining the shapes, using the same principles that we've talked about just before, this is what I came up with. Now this is a great starting point, and I've added an extended addition to this lesson that we've added to my existing Proko walkthrough that covers more painting and lighting techniques in the link below.